I want to recap some of the sermon. So we started with territory is promised. We saw it in Abraham. Do you know that God's got territory for you that you don't even realize yet? God had this territory for Abraham. Abraham couldn't even see it. He was in his tent and he was stuck with where he was. And God says, I've got something for you, Abraham. So God has something for you. For every single one of you. And I believe He's got spiritual territory, but I also believe He's got natural territory. He gave Abraham some natural territory. You go about obtaining natural territory and spiritual territory in a few different ways. The spiritual territory you get is by faith and by seeing what God has for you. The natural territory is you learn what's required and you do what's required to fulfill that. So don't think you're going to get some territory, physical territory, without doing some work. That was a good place to go. Thank you, Pastor, for that word of wisdom. I believe in dreaming big. Pastor Brenda shared that this morning. We need to dream big. Dream big and then dream bigger. So as God was talking to Abraham, He gave him a vision of what territory was. And then He said, every place the sole of your foot goes is going to be yours. And I believe that God has territory for you that you will actually walk around and experience and participate in before you actually get there. Abraham walked through the territory before he actually received it. In fact, when you look at it, you find out that Abraham didn't even receive the full promise. So the territory that God has for you, I believe, is territory that goes beyond your lifespan. If you only think of it in your terms of your life, you're not looking for territory, you're looking for property. But if you look at it for my children and my children's children and my children's children and my great-great-great-great-great-grandkids, if you have an aspect of that, what you're doing is you're staking a claim on territory, not on property, but on territory that goes on and on and on. So He took Abraham and He says, I want you to walk around, and everywhere the sole of your foot goes, you're going to have. And then we see 400 years later, Moses. God did not forget the promise that He had of territory. God did not forget the promise that He gave to Abraham. And He saw Moses, and He said to Moses, there's a land that I want you to go to, and I want you to talk to Pharaoh, and I'm going to tell you. And this is amazing. If you want to have a real encouraging story, read the story of Moses. Because God says, Moses, you go see Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go. He says, and by the way, he's not going to allow them to go. Has God ever told you, I want you to go and experience this, but by the way, you're not going to experience it? Sometimes we think, well, God says it and now it should just happen. But there was an aspect of deliverance that was required, an aspect of walking through, an aspect of seeing God work that Moses was required to see and the children of Israel were required to see a part of their way when they experienced the promise. And He says, I've got this promise for you. I gave it to your father Abraham, your father Isaac, and your father Jacob. And now it's time for you to start walking it. And He goes to see Pharaoh, and he gives him 10 plagues. I mean, Pharaoh did not learn. But when Moses left Egypt, he plundered the Egyptians. I find this amazing. They went to their neighbors and they asked them for gold and silver and goods, and their neighbors gave it to them, and the next day they left. God has victories for you, and on the way to your promised land, God can do the miraculous things, and He can give you provisions that nobody else can give you. They plundered. Do you know how they plundered the Egyptians? By asking them for their stuff. So Moses takes them, and 3 days into his journey, they start complaining. And then God says, I want you to send 12 spies, check out the land. And they check out the land and they say, you know what, it is a good land. It's fruitful. Here's some evidence. They says, but we're like grasshoppers in their sight. Think about that for a moment. The perception they had from what their enemy saw. The enemy didn't tell them, you're grasshoppers. The enemy didn't. That was something they interjected and they put into the equation without talking with God. Have you ever looked at a problem and you think this problem is just way too big for me? And you say, well, this is so great, but I'm just so feeble. I'm so small. The obstacles are so big. And what they did was they defeated themselves. And it actually says in Hebrews that God did not allow them to go in because of unbelief. Do you know unbelief caused them not to experience the promises? The territory that you have is connected to the way that you believe. And if you believe that God has territory for you, you would be amazed at the territory He has for you.